This video was made possible by Audible. Get your first audiobook for free at the link in the description. Embassies are the vessels through which diplomacy is conducted. They are the physical manifestations of countries abroad, and they are crucial tools in the field of international relations. These can range in size from tiny, like the UK Embassy in Mongolia, which only has a handful of staff, to enormous, like the US Embassy in Baghdad, a complex physically as large as the Vatican City, which reached a peak of 16,000 staff during the Iraq War. Big, influential countries will have embassies to almost every other country. The US, for example, has diplomatic missions to every UN-recognized country in the world except St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, Guinea-Bissau, Iran, Bhutan, and North Korea. Smaller, less influential countries, on the other hand, might only have a few embassies. Tuvalu, for example, only has diplomatic missions to New Zealand, Fiji, Taiwan, the European Union in Belgium, and the United Nations in New York. You see, there are embassies to non-state organizations, namely the UN and EU. You can even have embassies to agencies of the UN. There's one US diplomat in Rome with the lengthy title of United States Ambassador to the United Nations Agencies for Food and Agriculture. Even traditionally closed-off countries like North Korea have representation abroad. The DPRK has embassies in some quite Western countries like Germany, Sweden, and the UK, and these three countries also each have embassies in North Korea. Now, part of the way these embassies can exist in even the most different and opposing of countries is because of how they are codified in international law. Every UN member state except for South Sudan, Palau, and the Solomon Islands has signed the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. This sets out a number of laws on how embassies work. Perhaps the most significant and well-known is Article 22. The premises of the mission shall be inviolable. Unless invited by the ambassador or their government, any representative of the host country's government, be it police officer, government official, member of the military, or even firefighter, cannot enter the embassy. This, of course, is how Julian Assange stayed in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 7 years. He entered in 2012 when he was wanted in the UK for extradition to and subsequent arrest in Sweden. Assange stayed in the embassy while his request for Ecuadorian political asylum was reviewed, and, once it was granted, normally the next step would be to go to Ecuador. Outside the embassy, though, waited British police, and so he would therefore have been arrested if he ever left. In the end, though, after 7 years inside, it was the British police that arrested Assange as the Ecuadorians decided Assange had overstayed his welcome and invited the police inside. The Vienna Convention also lays out a few other important rules for embassies. The diplomats and the embassy are exempt from all taxes in the host country, the diplomats are allowed free movement around the host country, an embassy can have diplomatic couriers carrying diplomatic bags which cannot be seized or searched, diplomats are granted diplomatic immunity, the residences of diplomats are also treated as an extension of the embassy and cannot be entered without permission, diplomats cannot work or earn profit when in their host country except for with the embassy, and then there are plenty of other even more minor rules. Now, one big misconception about embassies is that this is an embassy. It's not. This is a chancery, the building in which an embassy is located. The embassy is not the building, it's the group of people that work inside the building. It is the group of workers that represent the country abroad. Another big misconception about embassy buildings is that they are the sovereign territory of the country they represent. This is not the case. It is also not the case that embassy buildings are in a state of extraterritoriality, that local laws don't apply there, as would be the case in the United Nations headquarters or on many foreign military bases. In the case of embassy buildings, it's not that the laws of the host country don't apply there, it's just that many of the people that make up the embassy, the diplomats, cannot be prosecuted for violating those laws, and those that enforce the law, the police, can't enter. Now, diplomats almost always follow the rules of their host country, as failing to do so would be unproductive for the very nature of their job, but when they don't, this can have serious implications. As an example, in April 1984, 2 students in Tripoli, Libya were hung for publicly opposing Gaddafi. In response, a protest was formed by a major political opposition group outside the Libyan embassy in London. On order from Gaddafi, an individual inside the embassy building fired into the crowd with a machine gun, wounding 11. One of those wounded was Yvonne Fletcher, a young policewoman who later died in the hospital from her injuries. Within 10 minutes of the shots going off, the embassy building was surrounded by British police, blocking anyone from going in or out. Once it had been confirmed through forensic autopsy that the shots did indeed come from the embassy, negotiations began. The British tried to get permission to enter the embassy building. You see, only some, but not all, of the 30 people in the building were diplomats, meaning that some, if they were found to have committed the crime, could be arrested for it. The Libyans, however, would not grant access. Therefore, after 5 days of surrounding the embassy, the British severed diplomatic relations with Libya, giving them another week to leave the embassy and country. This, you see, is what countries can do when diplomats misbehave. They can't go into the embassy building, they can't arrest diplomats, but they can kick them out of their country. After this incident, diplomatic relations between the two countries didn't normalize for decades, and even today, in 2019, the case is still actively under investigation, and it's quite possible an arrest could happen in the future. Normally, though, embassies are more concerned with building diplomacy. Typically, but not always, embassies are headed up by an ambassador. Sometimes, though, there are lapses where one goes without an ambassador for a period of time, and other times, a country might choose to recall their ambassador as a sign of displeasure. Now, the job of an ambassador is tough to define. In the simplest sense, an ambassador is there to represent their country, but what that entails varies widely from person to person and post to post. There's often a perception that all that ambassadors do is schmooze and booze, but to be honest, that's part of the job. They're there to build and maintain relationships with those that can help their country, politically, economically, or otherwise. That's just part of diplomacy, which is what the embassy's job as a whole is. This can be direct diplomacy, where the ambassador might meet directly with a head of state, or soft diplomacy. Soft diplomacy can be things like China sending pandas to foreign zoos, the US funding scholarships for foreign students, or France setting up a branch of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. They are more subtle ways that a nation can curry public favor with another. On a smaller scale, embassies will often have a portion of staff dedicated to promoting and exhibiting the art and culture of their country in the region. You'll often see embassies financially supporting and sponsoring concerts of their country's music, for example. Now, in addition to these ways of representing one's country, the embassy also represents its homeland through its actual building. As the public face of one country in another, it's got to look the part. For example, some of the world's most impressive and important embassies are in Washington, D.C., given that nearly every nation has a diplomatic mission there. The Chinese embassy building was designed by the children of I.M. Pei, a Chinese American regarded as one of the world's greatest architects, and evokes the same sense of clean, contemporary grandeur and opulence common with the greatest buildings back in the People's Republic itself, while still adhering to feng shui principles. Just down the street, there was the Embassy Building of the United Arab Emirates, a perhaps even more opulent structure clearly incorporating aspects of Islamic architecture. This building seems to purposely command a presence with its open sightline from the street, allowing one to look in and up. Then there's this section of the British Embassy complex nearby, a structure resembling an old English country manor. While countries like China and the UAE might be more focused on pushing their modern image as newly wealthy nations, countries like the UK might draw more attention to their long and storied past. Then there's the whole realm of the architecture of American embassy complexes themselves. With necessity, after countless attacks on its embassies through history, the architecture and design of American embassy buildings evokes security. Whether it's the one in Berlin, Beijing, Bern, or Bangkok, they all have the look of a compound. They're mostly modern, innovative designs, a conscious choice to associate these values to the nation's image, but they're still mostly hidden behind tall walls and fences. There are still some, though, mostly in places where security is less of a concern, reflecting the earlier architectural style of the US, such as the Georgian House of the US Embassy in Canberra, Australia, a building that would look right at place in the American South. But when embassies are in certain places, their buildings can't just be compound style, they have to be compounds. As the physical representations of countries, embassies are the clearest targets for those wishing to send a message to a country. During wars, though, there is often more work than ever for embassies to do in a country. This is why, as mentioned earlier, the US Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq ballooned to over 16,000 staff during the Iraq War. The embassy building was built in the Green Zone, a highly fortified area along the Tigris River in Baghdad. This area, guarded by soldiers and walls more than 9 feet or 3 meters tall, was and still is home to much of the international presence in Baghdad. That included embassies of countries like the US, UK, and Australia, but also some companies. War is big business, and the Green Zone was home to small field headquarters for many large international engineering, construction, and private military firms contracted to help in the war. That is to say, the Green Zone was primarily home to a large group of civilians working in Iraq, which is why it was so heavily guarded. Given the security threat, the US Embassy there was built to be entirely self-sufficient. It has its own generators, its own wells, its own water filtration plant, its own sewage plant, its own fire station. It even has its own internet uplink to circumvent the Iraqi network. It has its own phone network, both wired and wireless, which both operate pretty much as if they were in the US. They use the area codes of New York and Virginia. Unlike in most cities where embassy staff just live in normal housing in the city, this embassy has its own block of fortified apartments. Even during the thick of war, the embassy compound had its own swimming pool, tennis courts, fitness center, department store, nail salon, and movie theater. Topping it off is a helicopter pad, used to get the ambassador and other top diplomats around the country when they don't want to confront the dangers of below. The diplomats serving as part of the US Embassy in Baghdad do get another perk in addition to the pool and tennis courts and movie theater and everything else. They get more money. You see, when working in the US Foreign Service, and it's often similar when working for other countries' foreign service, you essentially get more money the more foreign a place you go. If you're serving pretty much anywhere in North America, Western Europe, Australasia, and a few other assorted countries, you get no bonus. If you serve in a place that has an extreme climate, poor quality of healthcare, high crime, high pollution, or has any other factor that makes it more difficult to live there as a foreigner, you get hardship pay, which is a bonus that ranges anywhere from 5 to 35%. That 5% rate includes places like Costa Rica, the Bahamas, Malta, and Bulgaria, while the 35% rate is reserved for places like the Central African Republic, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That rate of hardship pay can also vary within a country. For example, if you served at the US consulate in Dubai, you'd only get a 5% bonus, while serving at the US Embassy in Abu Dhabi would get you 10%. There are also some places that, well, just don't seem all that hard to live in, but do earn you hardship pay, such as Ponta Delgada, Portugal, a well-known vacation destination. This is likely only included because of its isolation. On top of hardship pay, you can also get an additional bonus if you serve in a place that is deemed dangerous. For example, Port-au-Prince, Haiti gets you 15%, while places like Tripoli, Damascus, Kabul, Baghdad, and Juba will get you a 35% bonus. So, in a place like Baghdad, you get a 70% bonus just for the hardship and danger you put yourself through. This is how they get people to work at even the harshest of postings without forcing them. On top of these two, there are also some other bonuses based off things like high cost of living, difficulty in staffing the post, and more. Now, in the modern age, some have questioned whether embassies still have a purpose. 100 years ago, they very much had a purpose, as communication was difficult, travel was slow, and countries therefore needed someone on the ground who could speak on their behalf to others at a moment's notice. Nowadays though, messages can be relayed instantaneously through a whole host of means, so what's the point? Well, ambassadors are not messengers. Ambassadors are representatives. They are there not only to work for their country within political systems, but also to promote it to the public as to increase travel and trade with their country. Many argue, in fact, that these small, personal relationships of our world's diplomats tying together countries of hundreds of millions or billions are more important now than ever. If you want to work in the Foreign Service, the US State Department has an extensive reading list of books that will help you get the knowledge you need, no matter which country you're from. One book on there that I found quite interesting was Blink: The Power of Thinking Without Thinking by Malcolm Gladwell. The book is all about how the unconscious brain works in making decisions with very limited info. Blink, like so many other books, is available as an audiobook on Audible, so you can listen to it wherever and whenever. I find that listening to books helps me fit a lot more in, and it helps make things like cleaning or commuting a lot more fun. Best of all, you can sign up for free at audible.com/Wendover or text Wendover to 500 and download Blink or any other audiobook for free, in addition to 2 Audible originals also for free.